a famous teacher got a very, very nasty surprise from his girlfriend's uncle after they secretly got married. We're talking serious, life-changing. Ouch. Then there was the English princess who basically told her family, thanks, but no thanks, to their fancy marriage plans for her, not once, but twice, causing a huge headache for the Pope. And can you believe a queen, who was supposed to be all sad and alone after her king husband died, just up and married her old flame, taking all her rich lands with her? Oh, and another super powerful queen got her first marriage binned and then, bam, married a younger dude who was her ex's biggest rival, like weeks later. Talk about a power move. And if that's not enough, one king totally ignored his advisors and secretly married a beautiful widow, throwing his whole kingdom into a spin. Number 5. The queen who ditched a king and nabbed an empire almost overnight. Picture this. It's the middle of the 12th century. Knights are clanking, castles are drafty, and being a woman with a ton of land usually meant you were a pawn in a man's power game. But Eleanor of Aquitaine was not just any woman. She was the Duchess of Aquitaine, a massive, wealthy chunk of what is now France. And she was also, for a while, Queen of France. Eleanor was married to King Louis VII of France. They'd even gone on a crusade together, which was pretty wild for the time. But things weren't exactly peachy. For one, they didn't have a son, which was a big deal for kings back then. They had 2 daughters, Marie and Alex. Plus, their personalities seemed to clash. Louis was reportedly quite pious and a bit serious, while Eleanor was known for her strong will and vibrant personality. She was, after all, from the sunny, cultured south home of troubadours and a more relaxed courtly life than serious Paris. Gossip buzzed around their marriage. There were whispers about her conduct on crusade, and a growing sense that they just weren't a good fit. The official reason given for their eventual split, though, was that they were too closely related, third cousins once removed, or something like that. This was a common get out of marriage free card for nobles, if the church agreed. So, in March 1152, after about 15 years of marriage, an assembly of bishops agreed to annul Eleanor and Louis's marriage. Eleanor was suddenly single again, and still Duchess of Aquitaine, in her own right. This made her the most eligible bachelorette in Europe, maybe ever. Her lands were huge, rich, and strategically important. Now a newly single duchess, with that much land, was like a magnet for ambitious men. As Eleanor traveled from Beaugency, where the annulment was granted back to her own lands in Poitiers, she had to be super careful. Legend has it that at least 2 powerful lords, Theobald V, Count of Blois, and Geoffrey, Count of Nantes, who was actually the younger brother of Henry, Duke of Normandy, tried to ambush and marry her by force. Marrying an heiress, willing or not, was a quick way to get rich and powerful. Eleanor, being nobody's fool, apparently dodged these attempts. She made it back to Poitiers. And then, things moved incredibly fast. So fast, it shocked everyone. Just about 8 weeks after her marriage to Louis VII was officially over. On May 18th, 1152, Eleanor married again her new husband, Henry, Duke of Normandy. Now, Henry wasn't just any duke. He was young, energetic, and already controlled Normandy and Anjou. He also had a pretty strong claim to the English throne, which he would indeed secure just 2 years later, becoming King Henry II of England. He was also about 11 years younger than Eleanor. She was around 30. He was about 19. This marriage was a bombshell. There was no long negotiation, no formal betrothal period announced to the world. It happened quickly, and for many, unexpectedly. Louis VII was reportedly stunned and furious. One minute, Eleanor was his queen, albeit an estranged one, and the next she was married to one of his most powerful and ambitious vassals and rivals. Henry, by marrying Eleanor, now controlled a massive swathe of territory in France, from Normandy down to the Pyrenees, in addition to his claims in England. This new combined territory dwarfed the lands directly controlled by the French king himself. The wedding took place in Poitiers, in Eleanor's territory, reportedly in a simple ceremony, not the usual grand display for such a high-status match. By marrying so quickly, and to Henry, Eleanor wasn't just finding a new husband. She was making a massive political statement and a huge power play. She had taken control of her own destiny and her duchy, and allied herself with a rising star. The immediate result was the creation of what historians later called the Angevin Empire. Suddenly, this young Duke Henry, soon to be King Henry II, was master of a vast collection of lands that stretched from the borders of Scotland to the south of France. Eleanor was now a duchess, and soon to be a queen again, but this time of England, and a key player in this new formidable political entity. Her swift, surprising marriage had redrawn the map of Western Europe. Number 4. The queen who ran off with her old crush and caused a royal scandal. Imagine being a queen, the widow of a king, and mother to the new young king. You'd think your life would be all about dignity, duty, and maybe a quiet retirement, managing your estates right. Well, Isabella of Angoulême had other ideas. Isabella became Queen of England when she married King John in 1200. She was very young, maybe only 12, and famously beautiful. John was, well, King John, a complicated figure in English history. Their marriage was a bit of a scandal from the start, because Isabella had already been betrothed to someone else, Hugh IX of Lusignan, a powerful noble from Poitou in France, a region near her own lands of Angoulême. King John basically swooped in and married her, which did not make the Lusignan family happy at all. Fast forward to 1216. King John dies, leaving Isabella a widow at around 28 years old. Their son Henry III was just a boy of 9 when he became king. Isabella, as Queen Dowager, still had influence and, importantly, dower lands properties assigned to her for her upkeep. In 1217, Isabella decided to return to her native Angoulême in France, which she was Countess of in her own right. The English council, governing for the young Henry III, probably expected her to represent English interests there, or at least not cause any trouble. She was still, after all, the mother of the King of England. But Isabella had plans of her own. Back in France, she reconnected with the Lusignan family. Remember Hugh IX, the guy she was supposed to marry before King John came along? Well, he was gone, but his son, Hugh X of Lusignan, was now the Count of La Marche, and guess what? Sparks flew, or perhaps old plans were rekindled. In the spring of 1220, Isabella of Angoulême former Queen of England and mother of the current English king, married Hugh X of Lusignan. This was a shocker. For one, she didn't ask for permission from the English royal council, which she really should have done. Marrying off a queen dowager, especially one with significant lands and connections on the continent, was a matter of state. Why was it such a big deal? Well, the Lusignans were powerful French nobles, and not always friendly to English interests in France. By marrying Hugh, Isabella was essentially taking herself her English dower lands, or at least the income from them, and combining them with the Lusignan lordship of La Marche. This created a very strong territory in western France, one that might not be loyal to her son, the King of England. The English council was furious. They felt she had betrayed her son and England. There were immediate consequences. The council in England withheld her dower income and her pension for a time. There was a lot of diplomatic back and forth. Isabella and Hugh, for their part, were trying to consolidate their power in Poitou. They argued they needed the income from her English lands. Isabella and Hugh X had 9 children together, creating a whole new brood of half-siblings for King Henry III. These Lusignan half-siblings would later come to England and cause quite a stir at the English court. But that's another story. Isabella's decision to marry Hugh X was seen by many in England as impulsive and selfish. She had effectively eloped from her responsibilities as a Queen Dowager of England, choosing personal desire and regional power in France over loyalty to her son's kingdom. It was a bold move and a surprising one for a woman of her stature and position. She had been a queen consort, then a queen mother, and instead of fading into the background, she grabbed a new life for herself on her own terms, right back where she started, but this time with the man, or at least the family, she was originally supposed to be with. Number 3. The King, the Beautiful Widow, and the Secret Wedding that split a kingdom. The Wars of the Roses in 15th century England were a messy, brutal time. The houses of Lancaster and York were fighting for the throne, and alliances shifted like sand. In the middle of all this was a young mimic and very eligible king, Edward IV, from the House of York. He was tall, handsome, and had just won a major victory. Everyone expected him to make a brilliant political marriage, probably to a foreign princess, to secure his throne and forge useful alliances. But Edward had a mind of his own and perhaps a heart that was easily swayed by beauty. Enter Elizabeth Woodville. Elizabeth was a few years older than Edward. She was a widow with 2 young sons. Her late husband, Sir John Grey, had actually fought on the Lancastrian side, the side opposing Edward. So, she wasn't exactly an obvious choice for a Yorkist king. However, her mother, Jacquetta of Luxembourg, was high-born, the widow of a royal duke, John, Duke of Bedford, and uncle of King Henry VI. But her father, Sir Richard Woodville, was from a more modest gentry family. The Woodvilles were considered by some of the high nobility to be upstarts. The story of how Edward and Elizabeth met is wrapped in legend. The most famous version says that Elizabeth, hearing the new king was hunting nearby, waited for him under an oak tree, often called the Queen's Oak, to plead for the restoration of her late husband's confiscated lands for her sons. Edward was supposedly so smitten by her beauty and dignity that he fell head over heels. He apparently tried to make her his mistress, but Elizabeth, being virtuous, or very clever, refused, saying she was not high enough to be his queen, but too good to be his mistress. Whatever the exact details of their courtship, it was intense and very, very secret. On May 1st, 1464, King Edward IV secretly married Elizabeth Woodville. The ceremony was tiny. It supposedly took place early in the morning at Elizabeth's family home in Northamptonshire. Present were Elizabeth's mother, Jacquetta, 2 gentlewomen, a priest, a clerk, and a singing boy. That was it. No great nobles, no bishops, no public announcement. The most powerful man in England had married a relatively obscure widow from a Lancastrian sympathizing family, and almost no one knew. For months, Edward kept his marriage a secret. This was a dangerous game. His most important advisor, Richard Neville, Earl of Warwick, known as the Kingmaker, was busy on the continent trying to negotiate a marriage for Edward with a French princess, Bona of Savoy. This French alliance was Warwick's big diplomatic project. Imagine Warwick's face when, in September 1464, at a great council meeting, Edward IV finally dropped the bombshell. He announced that he was already married. And not to a French princess, or any princess, but to Dame Elizabeth Grey, née Woodville. The council was stunned. Warwick was beyond furious. He felt humiliated, and his foreign policy was in tatters. This secret marriage was a political earthquake. Why did Edward do it? Was it pure love? Was it infatuation? Was Elizabeth a skilled seductress, or a woman of great integrity who captured his heart? Historians debated, but the fact remains he did it. The immediate consequences were huge. Elizabeth was crowned queen the following May, but many of the established nobility were deeply resentful. They disliked the secrecy of the marriage, and, more so, they disliked the rapid rise of Elizabeth's family, the Woodvilles. Suddenly, her numerous brothers, sisters, and her sons from her first marriage were being showered with titles, lands, and advantageous marriages. This caused immense jealousy and alienated many of Edward's old supporters, especially Warwick. Warwick's discontent grew and grew. He felt pushed aside by the new queen's family. This secret, surprising elopement, because that's almost what it felt like, a king eloping from his council's wishes, directly contributed to Warwick eventually switching sides, rebelling against Edward, and plunging the kingdom back into open warfare. Edward IV risked his crown and nearly lost it all for his secret bride. It was one of the most startling and consequential royal love matches, or perhaps infatuations, in English history. Number 2, the princess who said "I do" twice and made the Pope sort it out. In the 14th century, royal and noble ladies didn't usually get to pick their husbands. Marriages were about alliances, land, and power. But Joan of Kent, known as the Fair Maid of Kent for her beauty, was a bit of a trailblazer when it came to her love life, and it caused a right royal mess. Joan was seriously high-born. Her grandfather was King Edward I of England. Her uncle was King Edward III. She was a big catch. Everyone expected her to make a grand, politically useful marriage. But Joan, it seems, had a mind of her own. Sometime around 1340, When she was only about 12 years old, she secretly married a household knight named Thomas Holland. Holland was a respected soldier, but he wasn't a great nobleman. He certainly wasn't the kind of match Joan's family would have picked for her. This was a clandestine marriage, a private agreement made between them, possibly with witnesses, but without family consent or public ceremony. It was a huge risk for both of them. If discovered, Joan could face her family's wrath, and Holland could be in serious trouble. Shortly after this secret marriage, Thomas Holland had to go abroad to fight. Some sources say on crusade in Prussia, others say fighting in France. He was gone for a significant period. While Holland was away, Joan's family, completely unaware of her secret marriage, or choosing to ignore it if they had suspicions, went ahead and arranged another marriage for her. This time, it was to someone they considered much more suitable. William Montague, the Earl of Salisbury, a powerful and wealthy nobleman. So, in 1347 or early 1348, Joan went through a public marriage ceremony with the Earl of Salisbury. She was now, in the eyes of the world and her family, the Countess of Salisbury. One can only imagine what Joan was thinking, or if she tried to resist. Perhaps she thought Thomas Holland was dead, or perhaps she was under immense pressure. Then Thomas Holland came back. And he was not happy to find his wife married to someone else. Holland wasn't about to give up his claim to Joan. He insisted that their secret marriage was valid and binding, and therefore her marriage to Salisbury was null and void. This was a massive scandal. A king's cousin, apparently married to two men at once. The case had to go to the highest authority, the Pope. At the time, this was Pope Clement VI, residing in Avignon. Holland petitioned the Pope, laying out his claim. He provided evidence of their pre-contract and secret marriage. Joan herself, when questioned, supported Holland's claim. She admitted that she had consented to marry him first before she was contracted to Salisbury. The Pope ordered an investigation. It was a complicated legal tangle. Did a secret, private marriage contract, a matrimonium clandestinum per verba de praesenti, meaning they took each other as husband and wife in words of present consent, take precedence over a later public and consummated marriage that had family approval? In medieval canon law, the consent of the couple freely given was the absolute key to a valid marriage. After looking into all the facts and hearing testimonies, Pope Clement VI made his decision in November 1349. He ruled that Joan's marriage to Thomas Holland was indeed valid, and her subsequent marriage to William Montague, Earl of Salisbury, was therefore invalid and had to be annulled. The Earl of Salisbury had to let her go. So, Joan and Thomas Holland were officially reunited as husband and wife. They went on to have several children. It was a victory for love, or at least for a prior commitment, against family and societal expectations. Joan had, in effect, eloped into her first marriage, been forced into a second, and then, with her husband's return, had the first one dramatically and publicly confirmed by the highest court in Christendom. Joan's romantic life didn't stop being eventful there. After Thomas Holland died in 1360, she went on to make another famous love match, marrying Edward the Black Prince, heir to the English throne, again causing a stir. But her early defiance in secretly marrying Thomas Holland and the subsequent legal battle that went all the way to the Pope remains one of the medieval period's most surprising tales of a woman asserting her choice even against powerful forces. Number 1. The brilliant scholar, his teenage student, and the love story that ended in brutal tragedy. This is one of history's most famous and heartbreaking love stories. An elopement born of intense passion and intellect, which ultimately led to shocking violence and lifelong sorrow. It happened in Paris in the early 12th century. Peter Abalard was a superstar philosopher and theologian. Think of him as a rock star academic of his time. He was brilliant, matic, a bit arrogant, and students flocked to hear him lecture. He was in his late 30s and at the peak of his fame. Heloise was a young woman, probably still in her teens, living in Paris under the care of her uncle, Fulbert, a canon at the Notre Dame Cathedral. She was exceptionally intelligent and known for her learning in Latin, Greek, and Hebrew, highly unusual for a woman at that time. Fulbert was proud of his niece's intellect and wanted her to have the best education. So he hired the most famous teacher in Paris, Peter Abalard, to be her private tutor. Abalard moved into Fulbert's house. It started with books and learning. Abalard wrote later that he found Heloise not just incredibly smart, but also very beautiful. She, in turn, was likely dazzled by her famous and brilliant teacher. Under the guise of study, their professional relationship turned personal, then passionate. They fell deeply in love, engaging in a secret, intense affair right under her uncle's nose. Abalard himself confessed later in his autobiographical work, Historia Calamitatum, the story of my misfortunes, that they preferred caresses to books, and that their hands strayed more to each other than to the pages. Eventually, the inevitable happened. Uncle Fulbert found out. He was, understandably, furious. His trust had been betrayed, his niece's reputation and his own was at stake. And Abalard, a man in holy orders, minor orders but still expected to be celibate, had abused his position. Abalard was thrown out of the house. But the situation was even more complicated. Heloise was pregnant. To try and make amends, or perhaps to protect Heloise, Abalard offered to marry her. But it had to be a secret marriage. Abalard was a cleric and a renowned scholar. A public marriage could damage his career, as celibacy was increasingly expected of serious academics and churchmen. Heloise herself, according to Abalard's account, was reluctant to marry him. She supposedly argued it would ruin his career, and that she preferred being his lover to his wife, valuing his freedom and genius above her own status. Despite her reported reservations, they did get secretly married in Paris, with Fulbert's grudging consent, after Abalard swore an oath to him. To protect Heloise from public shame, or perhaps from her uncle's continued anger while the marriage was still secret, Abalard sent her to a convent at Argenteuil, where she had been partly educated. He had her wear the habit of a nun, but without taking the vows, as a disguise, or for her safety. Fulbert, however, saw this differently. He suspected Abalard was trying to get rid of Heloise by forcing her to become a nun, thus freeing himself from the marriage he'd sworn to uphold. Fulbert, either believing this or simply consumed by a desire for revenge for the dishonor done to his family, plotted a terrible retaliation. One night, while Abalard was asleep in his lodgings in Paris, men hired by Fulbert broke in. They attacked Abalard and inflicted a brutal, shocking punishment. They castrated him. This was not just a physical assault. It was a deep humiliation designed to destroy his manhood and, in the eyes of society at the time, his future prospects both as a public figure and within the church hierarchy. The aftermath was devastating for both Abalard and Heloise. The scandal was immense. Abalard, shamed and mutilated, retreated from public life and became a monk. He insisted that Heloise in turn take the veil and become a nun for real, which she did at the convent of Argenteuil. Their son, named Astrolabe, was born and likely raised by Abalard's family. Though physically separated and committed to monastic lives, their connection didn't entirely end. Years later, they began a famous correspondence, a series of letters that are both deeply personal and intellectually profound, discussing their love, their suffering, philosophy, and religion. These letters reveal the lasting pain of their separation and the different ways they came to terms with their fates. Their secret elopement, born of a forbidden love between a celebrated teacher and his gifted student, ended not in quiet happiness but in a horrifying act of violence that echoed through their lives and secured their tragic story a permanent place in the annals of famous lovers. It was a stark reminder of the brutal consequences that could follow defying social norms in the medieval world, even for the most brilliant minds.